The 3:30 p.m. meeting of the Bakersfield City Council is now in session.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to call to order the 3:30 City Council meeting of February 21st, 2018. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Go,
Here.
Vice Mayor Smith,
I am here.
Councilmember Rivera, Councilmember Gonzalez,
Here.
Councilmember Weir, Councilmember Freeman, Councilmember Sullivan, Councilmember Parlier.
Here.
Thanks. To comply with the Brown Act, we'll receive public statements now. Please limit your comments to the workshop item only at this time. All statements are given a 3-minute time limit, 15 minutes per subject. Are there any public statements? Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Under workshops, we have a staff follow-up report regarding homelessness.
Mr. Tandy, Mr. Telia. And welcome to all of you. It's nice to have an audience once in a while. So this is the largest crowd we've had in quite some time.
Madam Clerk, can we have the projector or the screen? Well, good afternoon, Mayor Go, members of the council. Steve Telia with the City Manager's Office. We have for you tonight a presentation which is a follow-up to a presentation that the council requested some time ago, earlier in 2017, which was provided by Louis Gill of the Homeless Center, Diane Contreras of Flood Ministries, and Carlos Baldovinos of the Mission at Kern County. That presentation back in May was an opportunity for several of the providers in the community to speak to the council and provide the council with information regarding the issues surrounding homelessness, current programs and offerings that are out there to try to combat homelessness, current funding models, and I think at that time there were some concerns about the potential of impacts to those funding models, which were conveyed as well. I think the presentation also concluded with where some of the gaps were related to the services that are provided here locally. And as a refresher for you all, the presentation that was given that night was included in your packet. As a follow-up to that presentation, Vice Mayor Smith requested that city staff come before you and provide a report on how homelessness affects the city of Bakersfield and how the various departments of the city respond to homelessness. And so what I have for you tonight is a presentation that does just that. I will be participating in the presentation along with multiple other department heads and staff from the city who will be giving various perspectives on the issue of homelessness and how it impacts the city. So just a little bit of an outline of what we're going to talk about. We're going to provide a couple slides on the current situation. We're going to show a broad overview of how each department is impacted by homelessness. We're going to turn it over to the attorney's office, who's going to speak from the legal perspective regarding issues surrounding homelessness. Each department's going to talk a little bit about some of their specific involvements in a little bit more detail. We'll have a conclusion, and then an additional item that was added, which is relevant for today, is an overview of an effort that was just announced today by the Big 11 Mayors Group related to requesting state funding for homelessness support. So with that, just a brief overview, something that I think we picked up from the presentation that was done back in May. Homelessness is a complex problem. I think everybody's aware of that. There are many factors that lead or contribute to the issue of homelessness, and any one of these listed or a combination of them can contribute to causing somebody to find themselves in the position of being homeless. As equally complex, there's no single solution to solve the problem. There are a number of different avenues that in combination need to be brought to bear to help address the issue of homelessness. First and foremost being coordinated outreach programs, which we heard a bit about the last time we had that presentation. And then multiple other solutions that need to be brought to bear that impacted anything from emergency shelter, housing assistance, and supportive services related to potential mental health issues, dependency issues, legal assistance, victim assistance, and also employment programs or employment opportunity programs, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So just as a broad overview from the city's perspective, historically, we have always supported local service providers with our HUD entitlements, specifically through our emergency solutions grants. About $300,000 annually goes to support emergency shelter services, outreach programs, and rapid rehousing efforts. Primarily, those funds go to the Homeless Center, Flood Ministries, and I believe the Alliance Against Family Violence. The problem throughout the state and throughout our city continues to grow. This is an issue that jurisdictions throughout California are struggling with. We hear about it whenever we go and attend a city managers conference or League of California Cities discussion. It is one of the probably top 3 issues that are facing cities throughout the state. And that also led to what you're going to hear later about the effort of the Big 11 mayors. One specific area of success that the city has been able to grow and develop is our employment opportunity program with the Homeless Center. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that is one bright spot that has developed over the years and has led to roughly over $1 million worth of annual investment in those programs. So again, just from a very broad perspective, what you have before you is a list of, broken down by department, of each department's interaction with the issue of homelessness. You're going to see a common theme, I think, in some of these related to cleanup efforts, whether it be river cleanups and the efforts that go into that when we do that a few times a year, or other smaller scale encampments that we go out and deal with throughout the course of the year. With respect to community development, there's a couple of different avenues there. One is through the funding opportunities that we provide. The river cleanups through code enforcement are a big source of staff time and effort. Also, we have random times where there's squatters and vacant structures that code enforcement has to go out and respond to, and then we have miscellaneous encampments throughout the year that are addressed. All of these items require staff time and effort and investment. Recreation and parks, again, they provide staff related to the river cleanups to go out there and with the manpower to address those and to remove a lot of the debris and items that are left behind after those are dealt with. Also dealing with trespassing in city parks or utilizing city assets in an unintended manner, which is also something that has to be responded to regularly. Our Public Works Department, through solid waste and general services, again, provides assistance related to river cleanups and miscellaneous cleanups. Solid waste also contributes to the jobs program through the job opportunities at the Green Waste facility, as well as our litter removal program. And then general services, as you'll see later, deals with a lot of miscellaneous damage to city assets. Anything from tapping into a street light for power to damaging city facilities, bathrooms, fixtures, and so on and so forth. Water resources contributes, again, staff. You can see, again, the reoccurring theme of anytime we do these river cleanups, it is really a multi-departmental effort, and staff from multiple departments contribute, both manpower and equipment resources. They also, Water Resources also participates as a subcomponent of our jobs program. They will utilize labor hours from the litter pickup crews to help with sump maintenance, basin cleanups, and actually some of the maintenance that's done on our levees. The police department is probably the most impacted, I would say, by the issue of homelessness. They have daily miscellaneous contacts that you're going to hear a lot of detail about, various calls for service throughout the city that require a response. They also provide assistance and resources for river cleanups, and also contribute to the jobs programs through the job opportunities out at the Animal Care Center, or the Bakersfield Animal Care Center. And then obviously the city attorney's office, as you're about to hear, contributes the legal assistance whenever we're going out and dealing with these issues. And you're going to, I think, hear a theme throughout this presentation of the city utilizing coordination with service providers in the community whenever we're dealing with any of these types of items. We try to be as coordinated as we can, and that includes knowing where we stand legally in some of these issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney, who's going to give you a little bit of an overview of the legal components.
Thank you, Steve. Mayor, council members, Virginia Gennaro, City Attorney. And I'm going to go through my section rather quickly, but as a prelude to it, as Steve indicated, clearly as the number of complaints and issues surrounding homelessness have increased, the number of calls to the City Attorney's office has also increased. Calls asking for advice on how to handle particular scenarios, what to do, what to avoid, etc. So our office has been monitoring the developing law, and we are seeing some common themes that are coming out from the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit, of course, governs most of the western United States and is the jurisdiction that we would find ourselves in if we were sued. So the first case you have in front of you is a 2006 case, Jones versus the City of Los Angeles. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, that concerns some homeless individuals in LA. They were unable to obtain shelter on a certain evening. They were cited and arrested. They promptly turned around and sued the City of LA, indicating that it was a violation of their Eighth Amendment by getting cited. And the Ninth Circuit held that the Eighth Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment, prohibits the city from punishing that involuntary sitting, lying, or sleeping on public sidewalks that is an unavoidable consequence of being human and homeless. And I think the key here is those last words, without shelter in the City of Los Angeles, meaning that there were not enough beds on this particular night. The next case we have is from our city up north, Kincaid versus the City of Fresno. The same year, Fresno was conducting some sweeps in their neighborhood, and the plaintiffs in this particular action, they filed a class action suit against Fresno as well as Caltrans, and they were indicating that there was damages not only to them personally, but they asked the court to stop the cleanups because they weren't given an opportunity to actually obtain their property, and they weren't given notice that the sweep was actually going to occur. In that particular lawsuit, the court indicated that the government had to provide some type of notice prior to the seizure before the city could actually go in and clean up that particular encampment. And as you can see again from the slide, it never went to a verdict. Fresno and Caltrans ended up settling the case on that class action for $2.35 million. They agreed to a policy which, it's my understanding, remains in effect today, which requires authorities to post a written notice at least 3 days prior to cleaning up any type of encampment or personal property in that area, and they need to store those items of apparent value for at least 90 days. Right after that, an interesting case, again out of LA, 2012, Levon versus City of Los Angeles. In this particular incident, we have homeless individuals again suing the City of LA and actually asking for a restraining order to prevent the city from further seizing and destroying personal property. And in this case, the Ninth Circuit not only upheld the injunction against LA, meaning that the cleanups needed to stop, but the court went further and said that the city must, quote, take reasonable steps to give notice that the property has been taken so that the owner can pursue available remedies for its return. Meaning the Levon case says that cities must have a due process avenue for homeless post-seizure. So we have the Kincaid saying that we need to do something pre-seizure, and now the Levon case saying that we need to do something post-seizure. 2013, out of the state of Idaho, I bring it up because, again, Idaho is also under the Ninth Circuit, so you can see the breadth of the Ninth Circuit district. It's one of the largest circuits in the United States. But in this particular instance, Boise was sued by a homeless individual. They were cited again for sleeping outdoors despite a lack of available shelter. The Ninth Circuit, again in this case being consistent with what it had done before, indicated that Boise's camping ordinances were, again, cruel and unusual punishment. Same situation really in 2014 with Desert Train, again out of LA. In this particular situation, the city had an ordinance that banned people living in their vehicles, and LA, again, the court said that this ordinance was unconstitutionally vague and it promoted arbitrary enforcement. This is a recent case, and again, I'm sure all of you are familiar with it. It's been in the LA Times almost every day for the past couple of weeks. It's the 2018 Orange County Catholic Worker versus Orange County et al. Both Orange County and then the cities of Anaheim, Orange, and Costa Mesa, as you know, they're planning to remove homeless individuals from the bike path that follows the Santa Ana River. There has been an injunction request filed by a particular homeless shelter in the area, as well as 7 individuals, to prevent the removal and the cleanup. Again, the focus of that litigation is to show that the local governments are trying to criminalize homelessness rather than providing shelter. The case to date, the judge has granted the preliminary injunction, meaning that the cleanup has stopped. And not too long ago, earlier this month, the judge has actually walked the path of that encampment. If you've been reading again the paper, the judge is pushing both sides to come to some type of an agreement. And we have not heard the end of this yet. We do not have a final ruling, but certainly that case is to be continued. Most of the common scenarios that our office deals with then is people panhandling near the off-ramps. When we hear of this, we typically refer the issue to the CHP, since generally that is their jurisdiction. The council did pass an aggressive, anti-aggressive panhandling ordinance not too long ago that, again, may be applicable. We do have people sleeping on private and public property. Again, there are penal code trespass violations which can be pursued, but we do need a victim. We need all of the elements of the crime. And again, it does fall hand in hand with this concept of encampments on public and private property. And when we have those types of situations, our office strongly encourages following the city policy when it comes to encampments. And so what is our policy on that? Right after the Kincaid and the Levon case, it was actually after the Kincaid case, the city attorney's office worked very closely with the building department, and we came up with a city policy, and it's written. Anyone can get a copy of it. And that policy, again, it was to follow the case law in Kincaid and then ultimately Levon, which was the pre and the post due process requirement before the seizure of property. So we want to make sure that due process is provided when we seize and destroy property. What that means is that there's a Part 1 pre-seizure notice, particularly in the river cleanups. When staff goes out, staff provides notice at least 3 days in advance prior to the operation. The notice provides that each encampment and each entry as you can actually enter onto the river itself, it alerts those individuals that there is a pre-seizure hearing that will take place. And if there is some reason why an individual that lives in that particular area feels that we should not be seizing their property, they are given the time and the date when they need to show up, and they need to tell staff why it is that we should not remove their property. In terms of Part 2, when the city staff actually goes out to the encampments and they secure that property, we identify by site and number where the property was found. We also post then an appropriate notice indicating to that individual if they return where they can go to actually reclaim their property, and we outline that process for them in the notice. The property itself is seized and it's held, my understanding is it's held at the building department. And then there is a post-seizure hearing 30 days after the operation. Any property that's left over within the city after that hearing can be destroyed if it's not claimed. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the police department.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council Assistant Chief Evan DeMessos. I'll be continuing the presentation. You'll see some crossover into the legal parts of this. It'll help provide some context as to how these laws are applied. So typically, an average day or a call for service will involve, officers getting dispatched to trespass calls, somebody drunk in public, somebody passed out, asleep, sleeping in public, or it'll be a check to welfare call of an individual who appears to be in distress or may be in need of medical care. Our officers, when they respond to these types of calls, we always encourage a services first approach where we try to provide the individual, if they are deemed homeless, with services that can help them get out of that situation permanently. So we look for a permanent solution. A typical contact in one of our days kind of follows this flow chart. This is a very simple flow chart. I'm going to add that in this flow chart we have a contact, we have a law violation, there may be a citation or arrest. The outreach part of it can actually be pushed ahead of the citation and arrest, where just because we take criminal action or action against an individual, we still provide outreach and we still provide resources to those individuals. Many of these crimes that are violations, they're not bookable violations, so the individual is given a citation and they're released. So a typical outreach might be contacting Flood Ministries, connecting them with one of the partners in the community. Outreach may include connecting an individual with the VA, doing kind of a pre-screening before turning that person over to Flood Ministries to see if they're in need of housing, if we can connect them with a service provider that can get them into housing, if they're a VA. There's a variety of things that come into play for this, and I'll go into some more detail. Here's a display of some of our community partners. The Mission at Kern County Homeless Collaborative, St. Vincent de Paul, United Way, Flood Ministries, Revive, the VA, and the Bakersfield Homeless Center. So this is where we really get into it. So if you look at this slide, this is a 2017 calls for service in the city of Bakersfield. These are calls for service related to individuals that are homeless. One of the challenges we have is educating the community in that homelessness is not a crime. So a lot of times we're asked just arrest them, just take them away. And there's a lot of education involved in what we do. We don't arrest people for being homeless. It's not a crime. So if you look here, there's an average of about 7,700 calls in 2017. It's about 21 calls for service a day. It's a significant amount of resources spent on the homeless population and assisting the homeless with providing them with resources. So some of the challenges that we face is, let's talk about some of these laws and how they intervene. So if you come across someone sleeping in public, you have to find out first, are there beds available at the homeless center or at the rescue mission or at one of our partner facilities? If the answer is no, there's no beds available, it becomes an issue of cruel and unusual punishment to issue a citation for that individual, because you're penalizing them criminally for sleeping in public when they have no other choice. So the officers have to go through a kind of a questionnaire with each individual. Are you aware of services? Have you tried to go to services? Can we give you a ride? Can someone come pick you up and take you to one of these shelters? Oftentimes the answer is, yes, I'm aware. No, I don't want to go. And why don't you want to go? I don't like the curfew. I don't like the rules. So then that allows us to take action. One of the areas that we have a difficult time with, and the community partners here can talk about this, is with female individuals who are homeless and they're female, because that's where there's a shortage that exists. So oftentimes a female homeless person will be asked to leave, will be asked if we can give them a ride to a family member's house or to a part of town where they can acquire resources and get some more assistance. So there's many factors that come into play when it comes to contacting a homeless person. So you take Assembly Bill 109, there's the realignment of the prisons. So we come in contact with individuals who indicate they're on probation or parole, they were early released from prison, their family doesn't want them, they have nowhere to go, and here they are, they're on the streets. Propositions 47 and 57 have made it difficult for us when we do arrest people to book them into jail, because a lot of the Proposition 47 crimes have been reduced to misdemeanors and we're giving citations. So an example of this is, prior to Proposition 47, if a person was in possession of methamphetamine, they would often use that methamphetamine in private. They would hide from us. They wouldn't use it, out in the open. Now there's no fear of an arrest or being booked. They know that upon contact they'll be issued a citation, and that's pretty much the extent of it. If we do book them into jail for the citation, which is rare, it's 8 to 10 hours and they're back out on the streets. So that's some of the challenges that we're facing. In addition to this, we often get called to businesses where there's a homeless person sleeping in the doorway. We're trying to provide them with resources. When you ask that individual to get up, there's bodily fluids left behind, there's sanitation issues. It's quite common to find needles or paraphernalia that are left behind that are creating issues. So when the officers contact individuals that are homeless, they have to kind of go through these questionnaires, figure out the best resources, figure out which partners in the community can assist and help out, and kind of find a long-term resolution to this issue. Oftentimes, it's refused flat out, and we're able to enforce some of the municipal codes, make an arrest, and the problem is solved for 8 to 10 hours. It's a temporary solution. As you can see in a lot of these pictures, there's sewage, sanitation issues, unsafe construction. We have issues with individuals tampering or altering electrical boxes to get electricity. There's fire hazards, encroachment on spaces, and overall just dangerous conditions. So another issue that we come in contact with, and another is the panhandling. So you guys have seen panhandling. That's a significant source for calls for service for us. We do the best we can. We work with the CHP. We utilize the municipal code for aggressive panhandling. The municipal code that was passed offers 7 different reasons why you can issue a citation, and that's a bookable citation. We'll book them into jail, and 8 to 10 hours is about the average they'll stay in jail for that type of crime. So before I get into the, so going back to this slide, one of the successful stories, one of the highlights that I want to point out is that over the past couple years, we've had an officer, Officer Gillespie, assigned full-time to Kern County Mental Health. Officer Gillespie, working with Kern County Mental Health, have focused on what we call high utilizers, homeless persons who are high utilizers of service. They're constantly calling 911. The police department is being called about them, and oftentimes these individuals display some sort of mental illness. So Officer Gillespie, along with Kern County Mental Health, will make contact, and we've seen a significant amount of success where many of these individuals are placed in hospitals. They're provided long-term treatment, and with very little recidivism or recurrence of that individual creating issues for us. So that has been a very successful program. The partners in the community, they work well with us. We work well with them. It's been very positive. We've had a lot of success. The relationship is there. They offer their assistance. They, Homeless Center, Rescue Mission, Flood, Revive, they're often coming out to our location, making contact with individuals, that we're in contact with. Oftentimes, the group of individuals that we're having the most issues with are the same group. It's that small population that we can't provide services to, but it's a recurring issue, and it's all over the city, and it's day after day, and it's almost a game of pushing a person back and forth across the street and pushing them back. So another very good success story is in 2013, we took over the animal control shelter from the county. We have an allotment of hours that we provide to the Bakersfield Homeless Center, and that allotment of hours, they provide employees from the homeless center who come and work at the shelter. Those employees develop critical job skills that help them get into the market, get back on their feet, and they're able to eventually, move into the world and get jobs and make careers out of it. So it's been a good success story. The crews work approximately, 300 hours per week, and it's been a significant investment from the city, but it's also the return on that investment has been huge in what we're getting out of that. I want to add on here the CDBG officers. So as you guys know, the Community Development Block Grant was added to our complement. These 3 officers, what's unique about them is they're primarily assigned to the boundaries that you see on the map. A significant portion of those boundaries are downtown. So these 3 officers have supplemented with the homeless problem. Obviously, that's not their only duty. They have several other duties within that boundary, but it's definitely a supplement to the 9 impact officers who are currently working and carrying the lion's share of the homelessness issues that we deal with daily. And here's a picture of our impact team. We're actually missing 1 officer from that picture, but here's the officers and their supervisors. These officers are all carrying with them pamphlets and resources that they hand out. And most of the homeless individuals downtown know them on a first-name basis, and they know them. And there's a rapport that's being built, and over time, we're hoping that we can use that in our favor to find permanent solution. And with that, I'll turn it over to community development.
Thank you, Chief. So in addition to the CDBG officers that Chief Domestos mentioned, the city also provides code enforcement activities as outlined by Mr. Tegula, and we also allocate the annual federal HUD funding program, grant program ESG, to several local service providers and help fund some of their operations. One of those is the flood ministries that Steve discussed earlier. They're out in the field and provide outreach services and address the immediate needs of homeless persons that are contacted by both police officers and code enforcement officers. And funding is also provided for 3 shelter agencies, and those are the Bakersfield Homeless Shelter, the Mission at Kern County, and the Alliance Against Family Violence. And those service providers provide immediate shelter, food services, and beds to those in need. And then finally, the ESG also goes towards rapid rehousing services at the homeless center. And that takes it a step further and does housing location and stabilization activities, connects the homeless with short-term assistance if needed and desired. And then there's also the HOPWA program that's allocated and administered through Kern County Public Health. I'm joined by Phil Burns today, who will talk a little bit more about the code enforcement side and how that works.
Good afternoon, council members and Honorable Mayor. I'd like to start off by just talking a bit about our flow chart that code enforcement has to utilize for homeless, when we're addressing homeless encampments. You've already heard from the city attorney some of the laws and the past cases that we have to take into consideration in our actions, and also from Chief Domestos and some of the hazards and stuff that we encounter. This particular flow chart shows kind of how a complaint comes in regarding a homeless encampment of some sort. This could be on the river, it could be in a sump, it could be in some other city facility somewhere. And we handle private properties a little different than this, but I want to kind of focus on public properties today. So the first thing that we're doing is actually trying to do some outreach. So we, if it's a river cleanup, we're going to make sure that the collaborative knows that we're going out to see if we can get a member from flood out with us to walk side by side as we go to campsites. If it is a not a complaint-based situation, then we're going to provide a services form to the individual, similar to PD. We're going to have that conversation. Are they aware of the services? Very, very similar to what you've heard from Chief Domestos. So I don't really want to repeat to you guys over and over the same items. The next thing we do is actually educate them about the camping, that they're not allowed to camp on the public property. And this is the pre-seizure notice that Ms. Gennaro talked about earlier. So we go to each particular campsite, again, whether it's in the riverbed, sump, there is a lot of various city-owned properties. It could just be in a sidewalk area between the curb and a building, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. But we make sure that they're educated, that what we're doing, when we're going to come back to actually seize their property if necessary, and try to emphasize that we want to push them to services. If we are doing a river sweep, the big difference in the process is there's a whole ops plan, and the kind of the front end of this is coordinated with PD, Water Department, Parks, to make sure that there's city resources available. We do the notice we just shown, then the next step is giving them a week, typically in a river cleanup. Not the 3 days you saw in some of the stuff that from Fresno. Typically a river cleanup, we'll post it on a Wednesday. The following Wednesday, that's actually when we're out seizing the property and actually cleaning the campsite. Again, our protocol too is if the individual's still camping there, if they're in the process of getting their belongings, usually there's some time given, allowing the individual to move on. If no one's there and it's a campsite looks like it's property, we actually seize that property, and like Ms. Gennaro said, we're going to tag that property. It's actually taken to a secure location, that's actually the Corp Yard, and it's kept locked up until a individual either shows up at our location and requests that, and they also have to bring their notice with them to make sure that's actually their property. So the part of this is we don't want someone else claiming another individual's property. After the 30 days, if no one receives their property, then it is destroyed, unfortunately. As I said, our process also is service coordinated. We really look forward to working with the other outside private entities because they're the ones that are actually giving them the services, they're getting them the housing, and the other elements that really help the individuals. Just to give you some quick stats, our river encampments, we're down to between 3 and 4 river cleanups a year. There's one coming up real soon. It's going to be on March 7th. Is going to be a noticing day. And then our cleanup day is that next Wednesday, which is the 14th. So you guys may see more individuals walking around different areas of town after we do our cleanup as we typically do. But again, just keep in mind, we're going through the whole due process. We're trying to provide the services. We're trying to link them with the other private services out there to help the individuals get help. The pictures up here on this slide are some examples of campsites. This is actually on William Street, just south of East Truxton. So if you know where the homeless center is, this is right down the street within a couple hundred feet of the homeless center itself. And we posted those because this is actually on public property, coordinated with, actually this is a homeless crew. This published this through Solid Waste that actually did our cleanup for us. And we went through our normal process with this site. And this is what it looked like after it was cleaned up. So this is pretty typical, whether it is a riverbed or if it's a site on public property. We follow the same due process, provide the same type services for each campsite. And with that, I'll turn it over to Parks Department.
So Diane Hoover is not with us tonight, so I'm going to step in for her. But just continuation on a theme, recreation and parks, you'll see some more pictures. Again, they assist, significantly assist with river cleanups when code enforcement is going about doing that. It is a multi-department effort. They also have to respond to homeless that's sleeping in parks or otherwise utilizing city facilities in parks that, you know, bathrooms and other facilities. There's quite a bit of trash and vandalism that can be left behind at times from that use or improper use of park facilities. You're going to see a picture here of, this is actually out by the Uplands Park, of some of the vandalism and damage that has been done. And you can see that there was an encampment of sorts that was out there that contributed to some of that. Usually that entails the closing of that facility and staff resources to go out and mitigate or address the damage that has been done before something like this could be reopened to the public for use. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick for the Public Works slides.
Thank you, Steve. Honorable Mayor, council members, Nick Fiddler, Public Works Director. Just to give you a sense of the two primary divisions within Public Works are solid waste and general services that respond to homelessness. We do have a couple other divisions that do respond, such as Streets Division and our Construction Division, but those are on a less frequent basis. The solid waste division, they assist with encampment cleanups in the river. They also assist with various cleanups throughout the city throughout the year. From 2013 to 2017, we've collected over 283 tons of trash from various encampment areas and homelessness activities. General services, as been mentioned in several slides, they respond to vandalism in various city property and makeshift connections. So what you see in this slide right here is where they've gone through and taken out a piece of the electrical conduit systems to connect, whether it be a cell phone device or some sort of device that they want to plug in. Again, another picture of where they've tapped into a electrical conduit and to tap into electricity or even to take the copper wire for salvage value. In regards to some of our other divisions, such as construction, we've had building materials taken to build encampments. And then Streets Division, we find them frequently in our lift stations because they're a secure area. So they'll get into the lift stations and create a little encampment in those areas. In 2009, the city issued a request for proposals for annual green waste and material sorting at our green waste facility down in Mount Vernon. The Bakersfield Homeless Center did bid on that project and was awarded a contract. The original contract was $154,000 annually with the option to extend. The program was so successful, it was extended and served as a model for several other city applications, like the chief has indicated, the animal care shelter, and now moving into the litter program. We're currently at $223,000 a year for this service. As I mentioned, because the sorting was so successful, in 2013 we issued another request for proposals. This was in regards to the freeway litter issue that has happened. Due to state budget constraints and loss of prisoner labor force, it impacted our freeway systems and Caltrans' efforts to clean up. Through a multi-agency effort to fund the freeway litter removal program, the city being the lead agency working with Caltrans, KernCog, and the Bakersfield Homeless Center, we put together a contract to do litter cleanups on 99, 58, and the West Side Parkway. Caltrans is funding a portion of it, KernCog is funding portions, and we delegated maintenance agreement with Caltrans for their state routes systems. We also, working with community, received funding for various cleanups along the West Side Parkway. We've entered into an MOU with KernCog annually to support the funding of this program as well.
And again, just pinch hitting for water resources, more of the same. Another department that allocates significant resources to assisting with the river cleanups. They utilize staff and heavy equipment to facilitate that work. Also, I mentioned the fact that they contribute along with providing some of the job opportunities related to the sump canal maintenance, levee maintenance, and some of the work that they do that is on a day-to-day basis out at Water Resources. So just some points of conclusion. As you can see from the presentation, the issues surrounding homelessness impact nearly all city departments, and there's significant resources that are allocated in response to those issues, those byproducts. The city departments do not provide direct services to those suffering from homelessness, but as you've heard from the chief and from other departments, we try to do what we can to be supportive of the efforts, to coordinate with the service providers, to make sure that we're bringing those resources to bear whenever we're dealing with some of the circumstances that you've heard in this presentation. And probably a critical component of this as a conclusionary or conclusion comment is that service providers in our community are critical to the city and serve as great assets for us when we're dealing with these issues. I think, no better example of that is than what you heard from the police department in terms of how they work in great coordination to bring those service providers to bear whenever they can, because otherwise they'd really be in a tough situation to deal with some of the circumstances they encounter. So just a little bit about some of the success about the other components we talked about related to the jobs programs, because that is something that has been something unique to Bakersfield. It's been something that we've gone out and communities have asked us to speak about. But just some metrics, over the course of time that we've had the various job programs, we've had 54 employees currently working for us that have come from the homeless center or referrals to the homeless center to us. 256 participants have participated in the program since its inception. Over 221 are now in their own housing, which equates to about 458 individuals when you count their spouses and children. And about 82 participants have gone on to seek other forms of employment as a stepping stone, utilizing our program as a stepping stone. And the program has served as a basis to allow for future expansion. So private employers are now utilizing the homeless center because they've seen the success that they've had with the city. And also you see with the DBA utilizing the ambassadors program. That was another offshoot of that program. So real quickly, something that is very relevant to today, actually, the city of Bakersfield, as the 9th largest city in the state, participates via our mayor in the Big 11 Mayors Group. And there, as I said earlier, this issue has been an issue surrounding all communities throughout the state. And in a joint effort, which is pretty rare to get all 11 mayors on the same page on an issue, back in early February, the 11 mayors joined in a letter to legislative leaders urging for funding to come from the state to help address the homelessness issue and provide resources to local jurisdictions to fund their programs. The request basically is for 25% of the $6.1 billion state surplus, which would equate to about $1.5 billion from the state, and would also include the potential of matching funds from local jurisdictions to increase that investment up to upwards of $3 billion. Today, there was a press conference that was held at the Capitol that included multiple mayors because they've actually been able to turn this letter into an actual piece of legislation, AB 3171, that has been introduced. There seems to be bipartisan support for it at this point in time. It establishes the local homelessness solutions program and allocates funding that has not yet been determined ultimately to the local homelessness solutions account. And as I said, the funds would be allocated to cities in proportion to the homeless populations based upon the mandated counts that occur. And again, the cities would be required to match funds. So I'll turn it over to the mayor if she has any comments that she'd like to make about this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Telia. We live in a very diverse state, and it's often that Bakersfield does not share the same perspectives as others in other parts of the state. So it is unique that our 11 cities, the Big 11, are coming together for this effort because this issue impacts all of us. Today in the press conference, Mayor Darrell Steinberg from Sacramento said homelessness is the single biggest quality of life challenge we face in our cities. Cities cannot do it alone. And so in asking for additional funding, the point is that we really can't. And then Mayor Faulkner from San Diego followed up and said, cities simply do not have the resources on their own to tackle what is clearly a statewide challenge. And so all of us are joining together with this effort to request dollars to support our communities. What we feel is very important, though, is that the local people be able to determine how to best use the funds. And so we're really pushing for that. I want to make sure that Bakersfield gets its fair share, and then that all of us are accountable in using these dollars wisely. Certainly, we've heard that outreach is an essential component, and I truly believe that that is a key. We cannot do it without our partners who are sitting right here in the front row and in other parts of this auditorium, but we really, really need you to provide that outreach component in making relationships so that we can develop the trust to connect people to the appropriate services. We know that mental health is a huge issue. I had the pleasure yesterday of meeting with a couple of doctors who are focused on addressing both mental health and then other medical issues and bringing those together. So I want to make sure that we connect those doctors with our community partners here, and I'm committed to doing that. So it is a pleasure, it's a joy to be able to connect with the 10 other cities to move forward in this effort, and I'm looking forward to the next phases of additional support from our state coming down. Thank you so much for all of your support, Mr. Telia and staff. We appreciate all that you're doing for this effort that really impacts our entire community and our entire state.
So with that, I just want to end, hopefully, this presentation in tandem with the presentation you heard back in May of last year is helpful to the council. It's informative to the council about the overall issue. We're here to answer any questions that you may have. Just a quick note, I included this on the question discussion slide because it's an acknowledgement of some of the success that we've had, at least with one of our components related to the jobs program, where we were awarded a Helen Putnam Award in 2016 by the League of California Cities for developing that program. So with that, I and staff are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Telia. Vice Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff. long time since last May when the providers came and showed us what they were doing, and I really appreciate all the work the entire community does, and staff obviously is very involved, and it still is one of the biggest constituent complaints that we get on a daily basis, just like the police department mentioned, 21 calls a day. And the big success, obviously, is the Employment Opportunity Program and how we work with the Homeless Center on that and moving people from homelessness and into jobs and into homes. And I just, over the last few years, my trips down south, I've watched that Santa Ana River grow from, you'd see a few under an overpass here or there and obviously they just weren't doing anything. And then they started providing porta potties and just letting it grow and grow and grow until, I don't know, what was it, 2 miles long, I think, by the time they decided, they had a crisis on their hands, and it was way before that. So I think that we need to continue to press on as we are, and maybe even it is a growing problem statewide and growing in Bakersfield, and if we can do more, we need to do more. And if this program with the state is successful, it requires matching funds, so we need to think ahead a little bit and how would we come up with that match, and how would we continue to expand our programs. So again, thank you to the providers and thank you staff for all the efforts.
Thank you. Councilmember Freeman, I think you buzzed in ahead of Councilmember Parlier. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Freeman.
2 questions. Why did we lose the prisoner labor force? Steve, you said we lost that source of labor for cleaning up freeways, and why did we lose that?
Councilmember Freeman, that's actually a state resource, not a city resource, but my understanding is that Caltrans, I think it was a liability issue at the time. I'm not 100% positive, but that was a resource that they lost.
Somebody decided not to do this anymore.
Correct.
Okay, because I just wondered. They're doing it again, because that seemed to be, actually, I'd probably like it if the car's ready to be able to get out there, and even though it's picking up trash. The other thing is, different of you speakers referred to the fact that there was this test: if we don't have enough beds available at the time, then we cannot ask someone to no longer, sleep in a public place, camp in a public place. So should one of our objectives be to always have enough beds? Maybe you have to have a surplus of beds. I know that takes funding in the various centers and providers, but if we had enough beds at all time, had a target of how many beds we need, because I know the number can move, would we then be able to more often move people who are, rather than violating their civil rights, because saying, well, we can't do anything because we don't have enough beds. If we did have enough beds, could we then move people when they're camping in doorways and causing camping in parks, a public nuisance?
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, I think Chief DeMestahos answered that in the sense that we would then be able to more safely arrest them for the underlying charge, the trespass or whatever that may be, without facing the exposure of a civil rights violation. But with the additional legislation like the AB 190s, that individual is typically looking at about an 8 to 10 hour jail, and then they'll be out again. So the answer to your question is yes, but a very short period of time.
Well, there's a deeper problem of why they're homeless in the first place and people who don't want services, but that's a harder one to address. But I would think that always having enough beds should be a goal, and that may be a funding goal, so that at least we then have the ability, it may be temporary, but to take action. Thank you.
Councilmember Parlier.
Thanks, Mayor. Chief, if I could have you come up to the mic, please, and Phil, some of it might be for you, too. So Chief, you mentioned that whenever a contact is made with homeless, there's a questionnaire that takes place. Is that data retained or captured to do something with in the future? I just wonder what's on the questionnaire.
Well, it's not a physical questionnaire. Our officers have worked with, for example, Flood Ministries, and they're aware of some of the pre-screening. Why are you homeless? How long have you been homeless? How did you end up in Bakersfield? Are you from Bakersfield? What's your background? So are you a VA? And we start getting into mental health issues. So when we do contact Flood or one of the other partners in the community, we could figure out, are they a proper fit? You know, what's their criminal background? Can they be around women? Can they be around children? So that information is retained. We do have contact, and we do complete what we call street checks or field identification cards on individuals. So we have a significant amount of information on each individual we contact. But because we have a consistent, the officers who do this are consistent, it's the same officers day in and day out, they understand what needs to be asked, what criteria needs to be met in order to place and guide these homeless individuals to the right resource.
Because I see so many young homeless people that, I think that, they could be, but I'm suspect that they're all indigenous to our community. And, with that information, I just want to make sure that we're not somehow being victimized by some other municipality's relocation program and, capturing that data to be able to rule that in one way or another. I'd sure appreciate it. So
Absolutely.
us as policymakers would be able to take a different stance if that was occurring.
Okay.
After the, and Phil, maybe this is addressed to you, after the neighborhood, after the riverbed sweeps, is there any statistical information as far as crime stats for adjacent neighborhoods? It's primarily downtown. Do they increase? Do they remain the same? Do calls for service increase? Do they remain the same?
Well, typically when we have a large encampment, the calls for service go up. When the encampment's cleared out, the calls for service come down because, some people view this as an eyesore, so now it's gone. Other people view it as a nuisance, or just generally speaking, unsanitary conditions they don't want their kids, their family, or themselves exposed to. So to answer your question, when we have an operation, typically calls for service come down at the conclusion of the operation.
Okay. Now, when you say calls for service, would that be in the riverbed or would that be adjacent neighborhoods?
Both. It'd be both. So in the riverbed, you have people on the bike path that are no longer calling because there's less activity. And then in adjacent neighborhoods, if you've relocated a group of individuals who are camped out in an area, they're no longer going to be frequenting that neighborhood when they're leaving their encampments. They're going to be in a different part of town. So you'll see calls for service in that area go down.
Okay, can you just explain to me real quick, our cooperation efforts, city-county cooperation efforts, if there's a county pocket within the city or border area?
Is there a code enforcement? I think, okay. So the police department, we work with the sheriff's department all the time. So typically there is a cooperation effort, but it's very rare that it crosses over. Primarily it's in the city and we're dealing with it ourselves. It's on the riverbed, it's along the bike path, and it's along the bike path in the concentrated Bakersfield area. It's not extended, it's not out in the, on the edges of town. It's in the primary parts of downtown.
Well, I beg to differ with you a little bit, Chief. I'm at the far south end of town, and I'm dealing with this issue on a daily basis around the Auto Mall. I saw a homeless camp off of Gosford, just south of Sam's Club and Harris. So, they are reaching the far areas of the city, I believe. And I was just curious if there is a county pocket within the, surrounding area of the city, how will we address that problem? If there's a homeless camp there, will we go in, or is it just allowed to be there and affect the surrounding city, but there's no resources to really take care of it because it's county?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is widespread. I meant in the extreme parts of the city, but if there's a county pocket, typically the county gets called for those. If it starts seeping into the city, then we're responding to it. If it's nearby us, we'll contact the sheriff's department, we'll ask for those resources. to come in and assist us with that, or they will take it over entirely themselves.
All right, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Phil.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor. I had one other,
Another. Go ahead.
one other quick, just through with these guys. I read an article, it was in Western Cities Magazine, and it had to do with the city of Citrus Heights, where they have partnered with the local homeless shelters, collaboratives, to have a case manager or a navigator to be able to daily interact with the homeless and kind of being a coordinator to, bring all points of the different facet of, the problem with homelessness kind of under one person or one roof. As far as, could somebody speak from the collaborative by any chance? Step up and, anybody? Don't be,
Who's doing it? Lewis Gill with the Bakersfield Homeless Center.
yeah, Louis, if we had something like that, Citrus Heights actually funds, the city of Citrus Heights actually funds through the collaborative a position to help coordinate some of those efforts. Is that something that would help here locally if something like that was done?
Well, what you're describing sounds a great deal like outreach and street outreach, because you're
Right.
going out and you're finding the individuals, as everybody from law enforcement and other service providers, business owners make contact. We know that outreach has been drastically underfunded for the city of Bakersfield for quite some time. Also, as Councilmember Freeman pointed out, we know that we need to expand single women's beds in the city of Bakersfield. There's insufficient space, and there needs to be an investment to make that happen, and it will come down to resources. But a position as you're describing, I think, would be welcomed by any of the members of the Homeless Collaborative that do that work. There are a number of service providers that would jump at the opportunity to be able to provide those services at a greater level.
Okay, thank you. I'd ask staff that we really look into this, potential grant opportunities or even directly funding, depending on what those numbers would be. And I'd like to see something like that when our budget comes up. Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the points of my colleagues and first thank all of the various departments in the city who have worked so hard to help mitigate the impact of homelessness in the community, and certainly helping with a lot of the issues in Ward 2. And they've been very responsive on a regular basis, and I appreciate all the hard work in every single department. They do an awesome job. I get requests all the time in my ward, representing the central part of Bakersfield, regarding homelessness. A lot of issues in downtown and other parts of Ward 2, and have worked regularly with not only the various city departments, but also with the service providers, many of whom are here, to help address the issue. And as it was pointed out in one of the first slides, homelessness is a very complicated issue. There are many reasons why a person, an individual, might find themselves in homelessness. And for every issue, there is a individual and unique solution. And so I think we ought to be mindful of that. And I'm very appreciative of the hard work that all of the service providers put in each and every day. I do want to ask a couple of questions. Well, first, one last comment is, when I think about all of the various different activities and responses to the issue of homelessness, I really think about it and categorize it in two different categories. One is mitigating the impact of homelessness, right? When a person calls, a property owner calls about a homeless person living in front of their property or camping out, trying to respond to that issue. And then second is actually reducing homelessness, actually finding the support services and finding the housing for an individual who's experiencing homelessness. Those are two different things, right? Mitigating the impact and then actually reducing homelessness. And I see a number of services and resources that the city is providing to mitigate the impact, but I think we need to take a harder look at how we're reducing homelessness and partnering with the collaborative. And so I want to press upon the leaders of the collaborative, and again, some of them whom are here, and I want to introduce them. First, we have Jessica Jansen, the Homelessness Project Manager with United Way. We have Jan Lamucci, Independent Living Center. Stephen Pells, Executive Director of the Housing Authority. Carlos Baldovinos, Executive Director at the Mission at Kern. And Louis Gill, who's the Executive Director of the Bakersfield Homeless Center. I want to thank you guys for being here, but I want to press upon you and ask you, some of you to come up, maybe all of you to come up, and to really give us some honest feedback. Where are the gaps in services as a community? I realize that we're all doing our best, and every service provider is doing as much as they can, but still we see the issue growing. And that's clear. Anecdotally, I'm guessing that when we receive the point-in-time count in the next couple of weeks, that we're going to see data that shows that homelessness is growing, but that's just my guess. But where are the gaps in services? When we look at the whole continuum of all the various different efforts, where are those gaps that we need to fill as a community? And I'm not trying to place blame. I'm not trying to play gotcha. I just want to understand so that as policymakers, as Councilmember Parlier pointed out earlier, so that we can get a better look at how to respond to this issue.
All three at one time. And also, Steve Peterson, thank you for being
I'm
here,
sorry.
Mission at Kern.
I'm sorry. Thank
So
you,
come
Mayor.
on up, and you can decide among yourselves how you're going to
Thank you, Mayor.
speak.
Council and Mayor, good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation. Gaps of services, your question, Councilman Gonzalez. Street outreach is something that's a big gap for us. I mean, we have, for example, the Mission. We can provide the shelter, but we just don't have the funding to do the outreach. I mean, we can do the outreach within our area, but when you talk about the whole city of Bakersfield, there's just not enough funding for that. So that is something that I can just talk about, that's a huge gap in services as a street outreach component. I know that Flood does, has dollars for that, but I believe they have just 2 employees. I would like to see at least double, to go out to those areas like you were talking about, Councilmember Parlier, going down to the south part of the town and the southwest. I mean, the homelessness population, if you look at it, it has expanded. I've been in Bakersfield 8 years, and in these 8 years, it's not just concentrated in Ward 2. It's gone to other parts of the community, and we just need to take a strong look at it and address it. And I really believe that one of the gaps is street outreach. So that's where I feel that's needed. And I'll let Louis and the rest come up.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Pells with the Housing Authority, County of Kern. Clearly, I mean, the ultimate solution to long-term and chronic homelessness is permanent supportive housing. And so how as a community can we increase that resource? I will mention that the city's been a wonderful partner. It wasn't mentioned in the presentation, but you've directed several times in the last 5 years federal home funds to support permanent housing for housing homeless persons, both the creation of new housing as well as the preservation. And so that is an important tool, and we believe with the addition of some new state resources that are coming down, continuing to use that tool as a way of matching and bringing down federal and state funding to build new housing will be part of the solution. We as an agency, as a housing authority, have a fixed amount of resources for housing, but we are considering allocating more of our resources to house homeless persons. It redirects it from other areas, but we think it's a very important issue in our community. In order to do that, we need services. It's not just sufficient to have the permanent housing bed. It actually has to have the supportive services that many of you mentioned. So I think that's going to be the key focus for us as a continuum, as a collaborative, is how can we fund those services so that somebody can make sure that they stay in the housing. Right now, we have a 90% success rate after 12 months for somebody moving into permanent supportive housing. which is amazing considering the population that we're working with, people who've been living on the streets and shelters for a long, long time. And so being able to continue that success rate requires that kind of supportive services. So anything the city can do to facilitate that would be incredible. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peltz.
Louis Gill with the Bakersfield Homeless Center and the Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault. I just want to second something about what Stephen Peltz was talking about. We're very fortunate to have a housing authority that is willing to invest in permanent supportive housing vouchers so that we can get this population into permanent housing. Not every housing authority is willing to make that type of an investment, and they have really taken steps to help us. We need those matching supportive services so that people, when that crisis shows up again, they don't spin out and have to come back all the way to homelessness. So you asked for very direct statements, and so I will. We're a really large city. We're not small. And if we look at the investment from the city in emergency shelters, it's actually quite modest. According to the presentation, it's about $150,000 towards emergency beds to cover our entire homeless population, to cover in the entire city for a year. And we know we are short for beds. BPD reported to us that we need more single women's beds. The Bakersfield Homeless Center would very much like to be able to expand to do that. Our employment program has been fantastic, and the partnership with the city has been wonderful. The jobs are the hook, right? We want to change a life. And so there's a lot of learning that has to take place in that. And so we are grateful for that opportunity. But again, if we look at the investment from the city, it's modest because there's work being done that would otherwise be done by temporary help or other contracts through the city. And then there's a significant investment by Caltrans and KernCog to offset that. And so we are incredibly grateful, and I in no way want to take away from our success in a collaborative with that. But the city has a growing problem, and we need to work together to address this. And a modest investment is not going to get us the return that we're looking for. And then just finally, the street outreach has long gone underfunded. It just has. If you talk to somebody from Flood, they'll tell you that it takes 17 contacts before somebody trusts you enough to even begin the conversation to go into housing or to receive services. That takes a long time. And so it is difficult, but it is worthy work. And we're very interested in partnering with you further.
Thank you. Before you sit down.
Yes, sir.
For the community who may be watching, folks at home or for perhaps people in the audience here, when we talk about supportive services, can you describe in more detail what those services actually are and how they help benefit keeping people housed?
So if we're talking about somebody that's chronically homeless, we're talking about someone that has really struggled in your typical housing relationship. They haven't been able to pay their bills. They're often dealing with a chemical dependency and a mental illness. There's issues that will come back up. And so then you put them in a home, and without somebody working with them, they might go off their meds. The person that used to sell to them might show up again. That violent relationship they're in, that partner may come back. There are things that can occur. And without somebody to come alongside that person and live with them through that, they can find themselves in a crisis again. And when the crisis spikes, we often see them fall out of housing. And then it becomes an incredibly expensive process once someone has fallen all the way to homelessness to get back into permanent housing. So it's everything from having payee services that help them to having somebody come in and making sure that they're making appointments, that their home is remaining clean, that they are getting up out of bed, and not dealing with the depression. There are so many different ways that our aftercare workers come in and help people with a quality of life that turns it into a life worth living.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the, thank you, by the way, and in terms of the street outreach workers, it was mentioned that Flood has 2 street outreach workers, but are those 2 individuals focused solely on the city of Bakersfield, within the city limits?
It's my understanding that they are focused inside the city. The Director of Flood sent an email today saying she has the flu and is home today and apologized for not being able to attend. Do you guys know?
They do actually go out to the county as well.
One county, one city, I think.
There we go. 1 county, 1 city.
Okay, so for the city of Bakersfield, within the city limits, we have 1 outreach worker.
It appears that that's what we are
Okay.
currently operating with, yes.
Okay, and do we have any sense from other communities who have larger number of street outreach workers, how many outreach workers we might need for a city our size? Do we
I
have-
would say that this is an emerging problem, and we all are developing systems as we go. I know that right now, there is a much greater need than the staffing available.
Okay.
So if I tried to give you an it would be difficult for me to give you that, council member.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to make a referral to City Manager's office for a couple of items. One is if we can work with the collaborative to come back and, once the point-in-time count is published, if we can come back and hear from them what they learned from that and what the data shows in terms of the rise or, well, I'm assuming it's a rise in homelessness in our community, particularly in the city of Bakersfield. Also, if we can receive from the collaborative as a whole some formal recommendations for the city of where there might be gaps in services and how the city might be able to support the collaborative. And 3, if we can start exploring for additional resources so that we can help support the collaborative. Thank you.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the term, very, very interesting, excellent report, staff. And the term housing homeless persons, of course, is quite a challenge. I have a number of affordable housing units. And about a year ago, I was encouraged to take a homeless person that had been homeless for about 5 years. And it is a challenge. I mean, it is difficult. And if I wasn't, I mean, he's probably gone through maybe 50 telephones in the last year. He loses them, and then he gets another one. And if I don't hear from him for a couple of days, I mean, he calls me, at least once a day, several times a day. And I don't mind it because I just encourage him. But so it's been quite an experience and helped me to realize that many want to be homeless, but he is so appreciative to have this place. But then the following of friends that he has picked up through the years, they find out he has a place and they take advantage of him. I mean, it is an amazing, it's been a huge challenge for me. So I applaud you, and I sympathize, I applaud, but thank goodness we do as well as we do in our city with our homeless population, because they're pitiful, and he goes from angry to not angry, he's been a problem for the neighbors. So, but I'd never have the heart to put him out, but he's getting better. So anyway, it is difficult. There's more to it than I realized. And it does take someone really helping and encouraging and just helping him, giving him ideas. And he doesn't have anything because he really doesn't want anything. The toilet was, this last time the toilet was plugged up because the plumber found chicken bones down. He doesn't know how to take care of things, but he's getting better. He's probably 45 years old, and so he's doing better. And I'm delighted that he is. He's basically, a kind. He knows, he said he's read the Bible 9 times, probably not 9 times, but anyway, he's very proud that he's read the Bible 9 times. So anyway, they need help, and it's wonderful when we see the help that is available, and then we have to, but for an owner or a management company, I can understand why they wouldn't have any vacancies on for that particular call, because it's not easy to house them. So anyway, I applaud you. And I was curious, approximately how many times a year are there no available beds? And it's probably a climate issue also when the weather is cold. Is that when there's the biggest problem?
Definitely when we have our fluctuations in weather that we see a real impact on beds. But when it comes to single women, we run at capacity regularly all year long.
I see.
And so it is a definite need.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just speak to 2 things that you brought up. One, you offered that you yourself had some low-income units. Low-income housing is at a crisis in Bakersfield. There are insufficient units. We have individuals out doing housing search for a very long time, and it's not there. And now I will offer a bit of opinion, but I believe it's true. Ever since the RDAs were removed from the arsenal of the cities to be able to create low-income housing, we have yet to create something else that gives them the capacity to build those units and that encourages that development. We have to solve that problem, because that happened long enough ago that all the projects that were being developed throughout the state, they're done, and nothing's being put in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, your agencies are appreciated.
Councilmember Rivera.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize for being late. I was sitting in traffic on the freeway, but I think I got the gist of most of the presentation. I think one of the most stressful jobs I've ever had in my life was working with all of you for about 2 years in affordable housing. I didn't just do low-income placements. We did homeless placements as well, and my hat's off to all of you guys, because I know it's a challenging job, and it's a challenging job in the face of limited or non-existent resources, and I think you guys are extremely creative in helping people, and I really I thank you guys for that. I think Carlos, you hit the nail on the head with respect to street outreach, because I do think that is a huge gap. And I think we've heard that from a few of you, and we've heard it from my colleagues as well. The issue of placement and the issue of getting someone's life back in order to get them in housing is laborious and intensive and no easy task. And so, I spent, I don't know how much time in Flood Ministries' office years ago with folks doing different interviews or making copies of driver's licenses or sitting on the phone with Social Security to get all sorts of different things, and it's a long process. And a lot of times those things you need these street outreach help for are the types of things that are barriers to housing to begin with. And so I often found myself, hitting a wall because someone was, finally identified, finally situated enough to, have a phone number we could reach them at regularly, but they lacked all of the things you otherwise needed to, to enter into a lease or something else. And so I think that's a huge gap that I wonder whether or not there's something we might be able to do in the immediate to maybe start alleviating that. And I think, you heard from Councilmember Parlier and Councilmember Smith that this is certainly an issue that now extends well past the boundaries of say, downtown Bakersfield or even the northern parts of southeast Bakersfield. And it is, in fact, a citywide issue. It's, I think, a citywide emergency. So I had a few thoughts, if I could, to offer, to piggyback off of Councilmember Gonzalez's requests of staff. I wonder, you know, a few years ago, an item that I thought was a citywide issue that I think the City Council agreed with and found it, you know, worthy enough of actually tapping some council contingency funds for, was on the animal shelter front. I wonder whether we have, I don't think we've tapped what we have budgeted for council contingency this year, have we?
Council member, I think it's $25,000.
That's what we budgeted?
I believe so.
Okay. I thought it was a little bit more, but okay.
Looking for Mr. Hewitt for confirmation. Is that correct?
Honorable Mayor, City Council members, for council contingency, I believe we budgeted for about $25,000 this year. I believe the council contributed about 10 to the branding effort. So we're, I believe, at a balance of about $15,000 as we stand today, if my memory is correct.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not nearly enough to do much of anything with, but perhaps it should be on the table if it can be used in some way. I'm also curious, you know, so I understand, and we had this presentation in Budget and Finance last week as we went over our home funds and ESG funds and CDBG allocations, and I know we talk a lot about our ESG commitments, but I'm curious, since I think we've kind of branched out in the use of our CDBG dollars for some different types of things, I wonder whether or not the larger pool of CDBG dollars we have available is otherwise available in some creative way to further assist the Homeless Collaborative or these particular agencies. And I'm thinking if it can't be direct contributions in a similar fashion to what we do with ESG, then perhaps perhaps there's an employment program or something else we might be able to do through those CDBG dollars that might further bolster what we already have standing and maybe give you something to actually offer even more people. So I might throw out that recommendation as well. I think the last thing I wanted to ask about was actually related to affordable housing. I'm curious where we think we are, and you don't have to tell me today, but where do we think we are as a city with respect to what we have currently in the pipeline? Because I do know we're allocating some home funds to some future projects. Have we determined or been given by someone else what we're deficient unit-wise? And maybe we should start having a conversation about how we start to tackle that particular number and eat into it. And I've always been curious, and I think other cities have been a little bit more advantageous in running after the affordable housing and sustainable community dollars. I wonder how, if we've actually managed to tap into that at all with any affordable housing projects, and if we aren't, how we might do that moving forward as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councilmember Parlier.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one follow-up. I don't see anybody here from the fire department, so Chief, maybe you could help me out on this one. On your police department contacts, do you have any statistical information on when you call for EMS services for homeless?
We could get that, yes.
Okay. When we come back, and I'd like to really see us come back and discuss this topic at least biannually, maybe even quarterly, I'm not sure, till we really get a handle on it. But I'd like to see somebody from the fire department and even Hall Ambulance in attendance to to talk about this, and why I bring it up is the city of Anaheim does a program where they have a firefighter, a nurse practitioner in an ambulance that responds to homeless medical issues. And they're able to do prescriptions, give bus passes to people that need to get those prescriptions filled, provide minor surgeries, i.e. sutures or something like that. And they found that it's dramatically decreased law enforcement calls, calls to the fire department for those services, and, well, in general, save money, including impact the local hospitals too. So if staff or somebody can get that information, or next time we meet, we have those people in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pelz, do you have one more? Come on.
Sorry, just wanted to add, so the Homeless Collaborative recently commissioned a cost-benefit analysis study that looked at 31 chronically homeless persons in Bakersfield that had been housed, and it looked at the 6 months prior to them housed and the 6 months after they were housed and compared their utilization of public services. Found a tremendous drop, a 90% decrease in interaction with law enforcement and arrests, 80% decrease in hospitalization, 50% decrease in emergency room usage, 50% decrease in ambulance riding. I mean, just incredible impacts and savings to the overall community for those persons once they were housed. So it's a great example of what you're touching on, of really the benefit of trying to be as proactive as possible in housing persons.
Thank you, Mr. Pelz. Mr. Telgia, any concluding remarks? Mr. Tandy? Thank you. So we stand adjourned. The 3:30 meeting stands adjourned at 5:02, and we will reconvene for the 5:15 meeting at 5:15.